All right, everybody. Welcome to the stream. It has been a good while. Let's get started. Um, First of all, I do want to address my voice. Uh, as some of you know, my daughter competes on a drill team, and last night was a competition, and I was cheering for her, and I've lost my voice a bit. Um, so we'll see how I do. If my voice starts to hurt or stuff like that, I may have to end. One thing I want to, um, so I'm off for the rest of the year. I'll be going back to work January 6th. Um, so being off means that I'll have less things that get in the way. So I do want to do some streaming during the week. I want to recognize that Tuesday in um, is Christmas Eve. Um, so um, I'm definitely celebrating that with my family. Um, so I think this week we'll stream again on Monday. Um, so tomorrow I'll stream again, and then Thursday. Um, a couple of things that I don't know. I want to take advantage of the Christmas break also to fix like some of my audio issues that you guys have reported and some other things like that that I just haven't had time to do. Um, so um, we'll keep that up. And if I get bored or something, maybe I'll throw in an extra stream here or there during my break. We'll see. I've got lots of stuff to do, um, but I do want to make sure that I get back on my old streaming schedule. So for the next 2 weeks, we'll do Monday, and then we'll go back to Tuesdays again once I get back to work. Monday nights tend to be really busy for me with work for whatever reason, but Tuesdays are, well, I guess most weeknights haven't been good lately. But anyway, that's the streaming schedule update. Happy holidays, by the way, and welcome to everybody who's joining. Yeah, I'm focused a little bit on something that I saw just before the break or just before I started. And you guys may have seen me pull it up in the browser. Um, but it was good that I hit this point in the upgrade just as we started the stream because I wanted to point something out. I noticed that we did a full version upgrade on NGRX, which I'm excited about to get to version 19 of NGRX. But whenever I do a full version upgrade, I want to make sure that we're taking a look at changes, right? So they give us, it looks like they've got helpers to help us upgrade. But then got minimum version requirements. Yeah, we're on Angular 19, Angular CLI, TypeScript 5.6, RxJS. So I think we're meeting all of these. But then they added some breaking changes. So signals will now throw an error in dev mode if we mutate state. This is huge. This is part of the reason why we were using we sound the same except I'm sick. I'm sorry you're sick. That's rough. I was just yelling. Like the funny thing about Drill Team is mostly parents. Except there are a few big schools in like Utah where their drill teams are really, really well supported by their schools. And so, when your girls are out there dancing and they need to keep their energy up, you're just yelling as loud as you can to just try and help them keep their energy up. A lot of parents don't cheer, so you have to yell louder, and it just destroys my voice. but I'm very sorry to hear that you're sick. I really hope you get better. Um, and hopefully, if you celebrate like the end of the year, the Christmas season, or whatever other holiday, I hope you get better. Truly, aha, good morning. Um, yeah, giving me that heads up. It's good to see. Um, um, Thanks for joining the stream this morning. Um, Julie, Julie's a good friend. Um, and I did know you were sick. I'm sorry to hear that you're still sick. I hope you're getting better. Um, in our area, um, well, I don't want to dox people, but in the area where I am, influenza A is going around. So my family's being very careful right now. Last night, there were a few people who said they had it in their house. So a little worried about being around them, but we'll see. Um, Hopefully I don't get sick. Um, but anyways, yeah, patch state, right? It will now throw an error, which is awesome. And they give you an example, right? So here we're mutating state and then returning it from patch state. Um, so this is a problematic change because we may not get change detection from it. And instead, so this one will throw. So before, I thought that the before and after was showing how they changed, and I was like, wait, how did these two change? But no. So now we're having to use reducers, um, which is cool. I really like this, but that may mean that we need to bring back. Man, it's been so long since I've used it. My brain isn't just instantly latching onto it. Um, but there's the library that I was using before that we may want to bring back to use for reducers so that we can write our reducers in a mutable way instead of an immutable way. So to support more cases, the props property is added to signal store feature, which replaces the existing computed property. So we do have an upgrade schematic for this. The computed property is renamed to props. The method is renamed to props. Named entity computed in the entities. I'm not using entities. I haven't really used entities a lot in Angular in general, but so this is a bit of a change because now we've got props with computed. This will be a little bit of a change. An Rx method destroy, that's fine. So there was a lot of stuff done in signals and in the Rx method stuff. So I wanted to make sure that we went through this. Whenever you're upgrading libraries, and this is why I really like tools like NCU, NPM check updates. It works with Yarn and PNPM and everything else, but I love that it highlights the changes, right? So it highlighted that this was a major change from 18 to 19, which then triggered in my brain, hey, we need to go look, right? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish the Angular install. And from there, we'll commit this. And then let's do the NGRX install. And the reason I want to do NGRX separate from Angular is I want to take a look at the changes that it makes. Our code still doesn't run, but we'll fix that today too. Anyway, man, so my brain is still stuck a bit. So my daughter, she's been working very hard. So her first year of drill team, her freshman year, she danced maybe twice the entire year. So in one dance during one competition and in one dance during another competition. She didn't dance during regional or state finals, and it was a tough year for her. She worked really hard. The next year, she danced um, all year long. This year, her junior year, last night was her first night of dancing all three dances that they dance in a competition, which was a big milestone for her and for us. So very excited about that. But judging issues, I get frustrated with that. Anyway, um, let's pnpm exec nx migrate. Actually, let's see. I think we want to just upgrade ngrx signals, and we're removing component store. Abra I am the moderator here. Please address me as Supreme React developer. Everyone will have a bad time. The big boss is. What's up, Abra? Oh, maybe I need to balance out your power. I love it, Abra. Oh, you know what? I got your message, man. I do need to reach out. We need to chat. But yeah, where am I? I have largely disappeared from a lot of social media for a little bit, and it's frustrating to me. Um, there have been there's just been some stuff going on that I need to work through, and it's made a lot of things more difficult. Um, and so I'm not on Reddit like I used to be. I'm very sporadic on Twitter and very sporadic on LinkedIn. Um, I have like 3 or 4 articles that I'm in the middle of writing, and I need to just finish them and get them out there. There's a lot of things that I'm working on. I'm working through some issues, and then once those get solved, a lot of the other stuff will get back into place. Man, sometimes life just throws some weird curveballs at you, right? Um, so that's what's been going on Rodores, and I'm sorry about that. Am I still in the same company? I am. I am still at Bill. Um, and so that migration I just ran, upgraded my signals, upgraded my ESLint plugin, operators component store. So those all got updated. Um, so let's grab that, and then we'll take a look at the migrations. So we can go take a look and see what it upgraded. And this is why I really like my things like, you know, I like Git cracking. It's one of my favorites, but I can take a look and see. I didn't, um, I didn't commit after we ran that, um, but I can see, right, we've upgraded NGRX component store, the plugins, the signals, um, and the Angular stuff. So that's all good. I want to take a look at the migrations that it added. Um, so replace several properties with a single props object. That's the interesting one. So let's go ahead and we'll run that install with no frozen lock file, and then we will run the migration. Um, so this is what I'm really curious about. I'm very curious to see what it changes for us. So it is running the signals, and it did change some stuff in our grid store for the pencil marks. So we did have a few computed things that it changed. So we can go take a look and see what it did for us. So this is the unit test file that we've got broken right now. But this is just a simple rename to props, which is pretty easy for us. This was another just simple rename to props. And then we can stage the rest. And we can just say, hey, we upgraded at NGRX. So there we go. Let's go ahead and push that up to our branch. And this branch has been around for a while. This is my September 8th branch. I usually create a new branch for every stream, but this migration has been a serious migration. Anyway, let's just take a look and see what else we have with our so Storybook, Striker, Swick, Testing Library, ngNeat Spectator, ESLint plugins, Cypress. So I've got a bunch of linting stuff. This stuff we can. I think we can just do all of this stuff with the interactive upgrade, which is another amazing part of this tool. I don't think there's anything here that's going to have Angular specific code to it. ngNeat Spectator might, and Testing Library Angular might. So let's go ahead and instead of doing those updates, let's do this. Let's npm exec nx migrate at testing library / Angular. So we'll migrate this one by hand. We'll migrate ngNeat Spectator. ngNeat Spectator is one of my favorite testing libraries. Like I like testing library, and testing library I think is a good library to use if you don't want to use component harness from material, or you don't want to use Cypress component tests or things like that. Testing library is a really good library to do component tests in also. But when it comes to actual unit testing, I think ngNeat does a really good job. And so there were no migrations there. So the last one we'll do is just ngNeat Spectator. nx migrate at ngNeat Spectator. And the reason I like Spectator is by default, so before, I think maybe Angular 15. So if you're before ngNeat was before 15, you're out of support, right? Because the latest supported version of Angular is 17, right? Because 19 is released and they support 2 versions back. But if you're on 14 and before, Spectator is a big help. It automatically configures your unit tests to run faster, which is something that Angular did by default, I believe, in Angular 15 and on. But Spectator does some other things that reduces like boilerplate and things like that. Listen, at work, we do not test. In React, I mean, what is a good and easy testing philosophy? If you get into unit testing with Jest, Cypress, or I want to do easy to write or somewhat effective, at least I say that I test. So that is a good question. And this is a discussion we've been having at work, right? And so actually I've learned that some of my coworkers watch my streams. I've also learned that, some of my coworkers attend my streams. I try not to dox people, but I'm aware of coworkers who attend streams. And this is a conversation we've been having at work quite a bit. what is the appropriate testing strategy, right? Some people tend to go really heavy on E to E tests, right? Thinking that, we'll just catch it in E to E with integration. Some people go very, very heavy on the opposite end, right? Where manual testing and things like that. Some people go very, very heavy into unit testing. Some people go very, very heavy into node testing, right? Um, and the question really comes down to when it comes to testing strategy, what kind of risk are you willing to assume, right? Um, and based on that, you can then determine, if the cost of your testing strategy um, is more beneficial than the cost of your risk that you're willing to assume, then maybe your testing strategy is good, right? If your testing strategy costs you more than the risk you're willing to assume, then maybe it's time to rethink your testing strategy. My personal philosophy is that testing should be done in layers, using like the testing pyramid as a guide, right? There are two types of tests that I think qualify in the unit tests and the automation tests portion of the pyramid. And those types of tests are your component tests and your unit tests. Those are both tests where you should be isolating, the subject under test, right? In Angular, with unit tests, I tend to prefer unit tests for things like services or libraries like that, where it's just pure JavaScript. There's no DOM interaction. Those are unit tests, and we isolate the service and test the service, right? The other side of the coin is component tests, where we want to isolate a component that we've created and test that component in isolation, mocking services, mocking other component interactions and things like that. So that's kind of the bottom of the pyramid. The next step up is going to be your E to E testing, your integration testing, your smoke testing, things like that, right? And those should typically be run in your CI/CD pipelines. And quite often, I recommend you run them at every level of integration, right? So run your E to E tests and your smoke tests against your dev environment. Make sure everything works. Then run them against, when you deploy, run them against your staging environments and make sure everything works. And then run them against your prod environments and make sure everything works, right? The danger of E to E tests in prod is E to E tests need to be running without mocks. So if you can't run your E to E tests in an environment that you can easily roll back or things like that, you may want to consider only doing your smoke tests in prod, right? And by smoke tests, I mean that your tests that are, checking, can I log in? Can I view certain pages and things like that, but nothing that's actually changing data. So yeah. Yes, thank you, Julie, for sharing a link to the testing pyramid. I appreciate that. I was just thinking I should pull that up. Um, and yeah, the testing pyramid is a good way to think about things, right? And the nice thing about the testing pyramid is the things at the bottom are the cheapest and it moves up in expense, right? Your E to E tests are always going to be more expensive, more brittle. Um, and it's just the nature. They're going to be more flaky too, right? And so, as you move up, and then, manual testing, humans. So I work with an amazing testing engineer, QA engineer. And I don't want to dox the guy, but there are very few QA engineers, quality engineers, whatever you want to call them, right? QEs that are on his level. He's amazing. He's very helpful. He's very, very thorough in his testing. But even as good as he is, it's still possible as a human to make mistakes, right? And even if we create checklists, sometimes you get stopped in the middle of a checklist and you forget, oh wait, did I run this step? Did I not? Right? Humans just aren't. We make mistakes, and that's okay. We're human, right? But properly written automation, so E to E and, unit testing and component testing is run the same way every time, right? Um, so, the most expensive is always going to be the top, the manual testing, and that should be done the least. So, yeah, yeah, do definitely unit test with in isolation, right? So, when you're talking about unit and component testing, we always talk about the subject under test, right? The SUT. Um, and your subject under test is what you want to test. Anything ancillary to that, right, it is really extraneous. And if you can't get um, if you can't get an environment where you can control kind of the ancillary features, then you want to mock them, right? Your subject under test needs to be mocked. Um, and well, not your subject under never mock your subject under test. That doesn't that does no good. Things that come into your subject under test need to be mocked, right? Anything you inject, because you want total control. You want your tests to be reproducible, and you want them to be predictable, right? Um, and so that's just part of the isolation. Please give you some guidance. We're going to get into testing today. So maybe I should stop talking and get into testing. Yeah, go ahead. E to E are my least favorite, Julie says. I tend to agree. I'm not a big fan of ED. At work, we have a bad issue. Oh no. I'll tell you this right now, Abraloris. I guarantee the issue you have is not unique to your location. Um, it's very common that we run into issues like this. Um, and it really comes down to, but keep going. Um, it really comes down to there's a natural tension, and it should be a healthy tension between business and between engineers, right? On the one side, you have the engineers who need to be advocating for quality, who need to be advocating for, the state of the system and things like that. On the other side, you have business who needs to be worried about expenses. They need to be worried about, are we meeting our users' needs? Are we, and there's a natural tug of war between these two. Um, and it should be a healthy tug of war. No side should win all the time. When you start to see one side start to win all the time, that's when you get into unhealthy situations where testing isn't done, and code quality suffers and things like that. So the build takes 30 minutes to build, and then we have to restart the dev environment. If I compile the Redux state, for example, the autocomplete takes 5 seconds. Whoa. The linter and formatter's timeout is crazy bad. Um, so that's interesting. Like long builds aren't necessarily a sign of a bad design, but once you start getting into linters and formatters timing out and things like that, now you're in a weird state, right? Um, and yeah, you're using NeoVim. So this is kind of where you start to get into. Are you guys using a mono repo at all, Abraloris? Any kind of mono repo? Because I'm very biased in the mono repo that I recommend, and I'll tell you right now, I'm going to recommend NX for you if you're not using a mono repo. Um, and the thing I'm going to recommend that will probably solve a lot of your issues is that you take a look at the state of your current software, um, and you come at it. We're using Lerna. Oh, Lerna. So the interesting thing is that NX actually maintains Lerna too, um, and um, it's a good mono repo. Um, I don't know if it has like the affected stuff that NX has and the ability um, to do some of the optimizations that NX has. But you know, good monorepo libraries are going to help with your builds. Um, my suggestion is that you take a look at your system and take a look at your DDD boundaries, right? Your data-driven design boundaries. I'm not suggesting that you need to go full, DDD. I don't think front ends really, well, I've never encountered a front end. Let me put it that way, where I was like, we need to go full DDD on this. I think every piece of software can benefit from some basic DDD principles. And one of those is your bounding contexts, right? What are the areas of your application, and are you properly isolating them, right? And if one area of your application seems to just keep growing and growing and turning into the big ball of mud, as DDD talks about, that's the sign of that is often the stuff you're talking about, right? Like crazy build times, um, you know, tools timing out, things like that. Certain parts of your application are just growing to the point where the tools that are written are like, oh yeah, I just give up, right? Um, that's when you need to take a look at that bounding context and be like, have we really isolated our bounding context well? Maybe we put our users and admins, well, that's not a good example, but maybe we put our users and accounts together in one bounding context. And really what we need to do is break out our users from our accounts, right? Because we've got permissions in there and things that just keep growing and growing. It's becoming a kitchen sink. And we're just throwing everything in there. Um, but usually in the state that you're in, Abralores, testing probably isn't going to fix the problem you have. Um, I'll be honest with you there. Usually when you've got a quality problem and the first thing you reach for is testing, that means you don't know what the problem actually is, right? Um, that means we're doing something to make ourselves feel better and to make management feel better and to make everybody feel better, but we don't really know what the problem is, right? If testing is the first thing you reach for, you're signaling, at least to me, that you haven't dug in deep enough to know what the problem is, right? Because testing, in most cases, when you're like, we need to add more tests, what you're really doing is, I've been using this analogy a lot at work, and in different places, but I really like the analogy, right? So you've got you've got this car company, right? You're producing cars, right? I like to use the Geo Metro because it's a tiny little three-cylinder car that's slow and is never going to perform like an Escalade, for example, right? A big, huge SUV that's a luxury SUV, stuff like that, right? Your Geo Metro and your Escalade are not comparable, right? You buy a Geo Metro for different reasons than you buy an Escalade. And if I sold you a Geo Metro and told you it's an Escalade, you would not be happy, right? Um, but when you start complaining about, hey, my Geo Metro is really, really slow to accelerate. Well, no kidding. You've got a three-cylinder engine in this thing, right? It's not going to accelerate. And you're like, we don't know why it doesn't accelerate, right? Well, you know what? Maybe what we should do is test it better, right? So when we put it in gear and we push on the gas, we need to make sure it goes forward, right? When we put it in reverse and we press on the accelerator, it needs to go backwards, right? The doors need to open, things like that. Well, that's not going to help your acceleration. You're just testing that, the Geo Metro as it exists right now does what it's supposed to do. But that's what you're supposed to do anyway as a software engineer, right? If you want to look at acceleration, you need to get people in who understand the engine, who understand the drivetrain, and can, start looking at the car and be like, oh, maybe if we add a turbo, maybe if we put in a bigger engine, maybe if we change the gearing, right? All these different things about your vehicle that could make it faster, accelerate better, right? Give it more power, things like that. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be looking at. And so again, in your situation, right, where your software has bad DevX, right? Bad DX experience is often more costly than a lot of other software problems because devs are less likely to put in the time to do good work, right? Because it's painful to work in the software. And so the devs are like, I don't want to pain. I'll do the bare minimum to get it to work, but this is legacy software. Let's throw it away, right? Um, yeah, testing is for me. The issue is for work. Yeah, exactly. But this is kind of the issue, and your company is not unique here, right? All companies, like every company I've ever worked at, has had this issue where at some point something is slow, right? Maybe it's a database query, maybe it's a build time, maybe it's page performance. Who knows what it is? Something is slow. And everybody just kind of looks at it and goes, I don't know, right? You've encountered a skill issue. And um, skill issues aren't really like every company's going to encounter a skill issue at some point. It's not a sign of failure or anything like that, but where the failure sneaks in is where is how the company chooses to handle skill issues, right? Um, if the company is willing to recognize, okay, we've got a skill issue, how do we fix it, right? Maybe we stop and we invest time in our engineers so they can learn how to fix this, right? Maybe we bring in an outside source that has experience that can teach our engineers how to solve this. Um, but a healthy response to the situation you're in for a company is to recognize, okay, our engineers are good engineers. That's the first thing you need to recognize, right off the bat. They just didn't have the skills to get us past where we are now. Um, let's invest in our engineers because they're good engineers. They have a whole bunch of knowledge about the company. Let's invest in them, and let's help level them up so that we don't encounter the skill issue in the future, and so that we have engineers that can solve these kinds of problems. Right? That's healthy, and your your company is going to produce better engineers, produce a better DevX, and things like that. The opposite end of the spectrum is like, oh, how did we get there? How did we screw up like this? This is a huge mistake. You guys should have seen this coming. Blah 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 blah. I read in this journal that you can solve it this way, right? Well, quite often the stuff you read in journals is way oversimplified and who knows what, right? Um, but that's the unhealthy way to blame the engineers that you're in an issue, right? I've never worked with an engineer who doesn't want to produce the best quality, right? Um, every engineer I've worked with wants to produce the best that they can. Skill issues happen. I have skill issues. Everybody has skill issues. So yeah, yeah. See, and that is exactly the problem, Alrededores, is you've got your sprint tickets, right? You've got product and business that want features delivered by a certain date. You've got all of these pressures that push down on you. And then you've got your software where you're offline for like 45 minutes if you build, right? I'm just guessing here on how long it takes for the other stuff, just based on the stuff you said before. And so, like, anytime you build, you lose 45 minutes of time, right? But you've still got, you need your tickets, you need to write your tests, you need to do this, you need to do that. But every time you do and you build, and it like, so either you don't build very often, right? I have skill issues. They don't want to make me an API, so I have to call 3 API calls to the available balances for account. Thank you, Java. Oh, Abradores. You are describing every company. I like these issues. I'm laughing because I've encountered this situation so many times, and I agree with you. Um, there, so one of the famous laws of software, right, is Conway's law. Um, and Conway's law says that in any software organization, software evolves to mimic the communication structure of that organization, right? Um, when you have a Java API that is very unhelpful, very very difficult to work with, and provides three different calls, right? That API isn't thinking about the other part of the company. It's very self-centered, very focused on themselves. They're probably a prickly group to deal with, and their software shows it, right? Um, and it's always fascinating to me. I like to talk about healthy situations, right? In a healthy situation, you would be able to go to them and be like, "Hey, can we make this better?" Um, in an unhealthy situation, they're like, "Ah, just solve it in the front end," right? And that's the thing about UI that most people like. Back end engineers love to make fun of UI engineers, right? The problem is UI engineers spend a lot of time developing crazy complicated solutions to solve issues that back-end engineers refuse to recognize, right? Um, and that's the reality of a lot of software. Like a lot of software is unnecessarily complex because the back end and the front end never get along, and everybody's like, "Oh, the back end's too difficult. Solve it in the front end." Like, right? You become this group where we can't solve the problem, so you guys figure it out. And it cracks me up. Um, yeah, rip. Exactly, Julie. Um, my team leader doesn't even take responsibility. That is the infuriating part. For him, microservices architecture means that our front end will take the hit in terms of bad decisions. This is not what I want. Yeah. Um, and um, this is why when you hear companies come out and they're like, we're going away from microservices, right? Microservices don't solve the problems that we have, things like that. It's because they didn't really build microservices. Well, maybe they did, right? But they didn't think about their microservices, and they didn't think about the stuff that microservices bring along with them, right? Eventual consistency and auth like OID type issues that you can run into, and event storms that you could kick off by having to make multiple calls and then kick off multiple calls and things like that, right? um, Microservices need to be done in a very intentional way, um, and microservices are a great way to implement like a DDD style architecture. If you're not to the point where you need domain driven design, if your architecture isn't that complicated, microservices are probably not your solution. Um, you could probably get better performance in different ways and better scalability in different ways, right? Um, Quite often we reach for microservices, not understanding what microservices are going to give us, but also not understanding the trade offs that they're going to cause. And you're getting into some really painful stuff, right? Um, every team has its own APIs. The other team has an API that I want to use exactly what I need. Whoa, microservices means job security for Java developers. And it's the way with all APIs, right? Microservices are going to amplify your communication issues. They're going to amplify your performance issues. And they're going to amplify a lot of other issues that will show up in the front end and be painful in the front end. And that's why, when people start talking about microservice architecture, the hairs on the, like, my spidey sense goes, right? The hairs on the back of my neck stand up because I'm suddenly very interested, because there's so many pitfalls we can fall into in a microservice architecture. Um, and most people don't think about those until they're beating us over the head. It is crazy to me that every team has their own API and you can't call another team's API. I'm really curious about that one, Abradores. That is a fascinating one. Because that is a whole new level of Conway's law that I haven't experienced. Um, I've never worked in an environment where I wasn't allowed to use any of the APIs, right? Like if an API is out there, it basically becomes public consumption, right? And that's the other thing that microservices can expose your company to is um, anybody sufficiently technical can look at your application, can watch your network traces, um, and if they can figure out how to sign into your service, they can figure out how to start calling your microservices too, right? Um, because your web application has to be public facing, right? Um, and anybody who's sufficiently technical enough can figure out how to sign into your application another way. And once they do that, they can start calling your microservice APIs themselves, right? So that's that's another interesting piece of microservices, right? Is security, and your architecture. Um, like you may not think about like, oh, our devs would never do that. Well, who cares about your devs? You get a sufficiently technical person who is sufficiently determined to use your software in the way they want to. They're going to start doing things that your devs would never do. Um, my Java developers haven't produced an API in 3 months. I'm not joking. I totally believe you. Like this is what you're describing, Obrador, is the reality of software development, right? Um, and you're talking about the kind of the dark underbelly that we don't like to talk about corporate development, right? And in corporations, right, there is some political stuff going on, and teams that play the political game better often are more powerful than other teams, um, and you wind up with these power imbalances where a team who doesn't produce an API or a microservice or who knows what in months is able to point at another team that probably shoulders a lot of the work and say they need to do their job better. And everybody in management on up goes, yeah, yeah, that's true. They need to be doing their job better, right? Um, and it's very frustrating, right? Because you're on the ground and you're experiencing this, and this happens everywhere, right? And sometimes it's the front end that's more powerful, right? Because they produce this amazing experience, um, and they're very intolerant to the back end, and so they're really good at playing the game, and they go to management and like, you know what, these back end guys, they kind of suck and they're not doing what we need them to do. They should do their job better. And management's like, oh yeah, they should do their job better. And then they come down hard on the back end guys, right? And the back end guys are shouldering all the work, and they're frustrated at the front end guys because the front end guys are they're getting all the perks, but they're right. And it can go the other way where the back end guys are, they're producing, but their stuff's hard to use. It's a poor developer experience. They go to management like, these front end guys don't know how to do their job. They need to do their job better. Management's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then management's like, you front end guys need to handle your job better, right? And this happens at companies all the time. So let me throw more onto the fire. I have to give my boss some screenshots of the pages that I develop, and I had to say that this will not be the real components because we have a team developing a component library and they had some bad issues. Components that have on chains that do not do stuff on chain. Oh, you're not really throwing stuff on the fire. I mean, you sniped me good here, right? Because you're describing every enterprise software ever, um, right? Um, and the reason you have to use this component library is because some VP or director early in their career helped them create this component library, and this helped them build their career, and so now they lean heavily into this library, and everybody needs to use this library because now they have power and they can tell everybody they have to use this library, right? Uh, Yeah, Julie, I'm gonna be honest with you. He's describing like I've worked at multiple companies. I've worked at multiple enterprise companies. This is, I mean, I'm sorry, Abra. This is, and what I will say is that I respect the fact that you're analyzing this and that you care, right? Um, that's the important part. Developers who care are going to produce better code than developers who don't. And the problem is that in a process like this, it just grinds at you and it grinds at you and it grinds at you. And eventually you burn out your developers, and then your developers stop caring. And once your developers stop caring, then these problems become bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually they have to bring in a tiger team that's like, what's going on? The tiger team comes in and they're like, oh, this is so horrible. Nobody can work in it. We need to rewrite it. We need to use the latest technology and blah, 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 right? And business is like, oh, this is so expensive. How come our developers suck so much? Blah, 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 right? The real issue is that the developers have been ground down to the point that they don't care, right? Um, and this is unfortunately very, very common across the industry. Um, and I don't have a solution for it, right? I wish I did, um, because software is expensive. Um, wow, way to go, Alvarez. Very, very happy to hear that you got a job where you. If you guys don't know, Alvarez has been a friend of the channel for a very long time, since I started. Um, and we were interacting on Reddit before I started streaming. So he's been a friend for a very long time. He went through some tough times. So I'm very happy to hear that you've got an amazing job. Get Laravel and get contract work. Um, I feel like decent management and listening to devs would fix 99% of issues. So Julie, you and I, or Jules, I don't, you and I have talked about the Peter principle in the past, right? Um, and I just read an article before I started streaming today that kind of hit on the same notes of the Peter principle. And the idea of the Peter principle is that people keep getting promoted until they reach an area of incompetence, right? Um, and the real failing here is not that we're promoting technically competent people. That's not the real failure. The real failure is that most organizations don't provide leadership help, right? They don't provide leadership coaching. They don't provide things like that. And so what happens is you get a developer who starts to do really well, so they promote that developer, right? And then they promote that developer again and again and again until they reach a point, usually in management, where they don't know what they're doing. Um, and they're often floundering, and their directions change regularly, and it's just right, they're not in the right position. And we don't recognize that, and we don't coach them and help them learn how to lead. And so we wind up with software that doesn't have good direction, and it's a tough thing. Um, yeah, um, better than nothing. Yeah. So that's it is often management stuff. It's often politics. It's often imbalances of power. It's often, I mean, there's just so many things, right? Um, that lead to these situations where the healthy checks and balances that are in place have been upset. And because those healthy checks and balances have been upset, your software reflects that, right? having no job is bad. Well, yeah, I remember where you were. There were a lot of times where I was personally worried about your health and well-being. Um, I could see the effects on you, man. And it's always, in a lot of the world, our identity is strongly linked to what we do, right? Um, and that can lead to some difficult places. And the problem is, when you're in those difficult places and you need help, well, if I don't have a job, how do I pay for the person who's going to help me, right? And maybe Europe is better than the US in this regard. Well, probably. I will say probably Europe is better than the US in this regard, where you can hopefully get help if you don't have the means, right? Um, but yeah, I'm, you know, it's tough. Everything went bad. A lot of friends that I knew scammed me. Ugh, had no job, and my best friend asked me for money because his activity was going bankrupt. Said he would pay me back. He just ghosted me. Uh, yeah, man, that's rough. I'm sorry to hear that. There, it's always. I mean, in the U.S., we have this saying, when it rains, it pours, right? And um, I don't know if there's a similar saying, in other places, but basically, I live in a desert, and if it pours because of the high clay content in the area where I live, and just the way desert environments are, that where they're not really built for a lot of rain, and then the fact that we built houses in places where over the years there have been riverbeds and washes, but they were dry because we haven't had the amount of rain where those drainage areas were needed, right? When it pours in the area I'm in, we get flooding, and it causes a lot more problems, right? And that's kind of the meaning of the phrase, right? Is that when things start going bad, it's not just one thing that goes bad. It seems like the whole world goes bad, right? And that's a little bit of what I was alluding to earlier, right? Like things start going bad, and it's not just that one thing going bad. It's a whole myriad of things going bad, and that leads to situations where you're just like, you've got to start letting things go, and you've got to start prioritizing. Um, yeah, I get what you're saying, right? When one thing starts going bad, everything goes bad. And uh, it's a struggle, man. I hear you on that. Um, and I don't know. I mean, there's just so many crazy things going on right now, right? Like the inflation that's going on. I go out to dinner with my wife, and we get the bill. We're like, what the hell? We don't even have our kids with us. Where did this bill come from, right? Um, but things have just gotten so much more expensive, and that compounds with other things, and then it's just like, what is going on, right? I, I'm, I'm not so self-focused to not recognize that everybody's experiencing issues. Um, and I'm glad, I'm glad things have gotten better for you, Abradores. Um, I'm really happy to hear that. Uh, I'm glad you're out of the morass of things going bad. Um, so need to find the right people to try to collaborate. I know that with my ex-friend, I couldn't get high in life. I mean, money or status. That is also why I wanted to speak to you. I need to create a network of people. Yeah, and I will reach out to you. I'll reach out to you on Reddit. Um, and we can talk. and set up a time when we could talk, because yeah, I'm absolutely willing to be a part of kind of a network, right? Um, I will, like, one of the things that I would like to just, we've gotten a bit philosophical and deep here, right, in this stream. But one thing I want to recommend to everybody um, is that you build a network, right? So in the past, when I've had issues with, work, right? If I was laid off or who knows what, um, I have a network of people that I can reach out to and just be like, "Hey, do you know of anything? Have you heard of anything?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me recommend this," or "Let me recommend you here," right? And that allows me to jump the line, right? If you're going on LinkedIn and you're submitting resumes, you're in line, right? And you're it's kind of like and I'll be honest, I don't know if clubs are this way anymore, right? I was going to clubs way back when I was going to college in the early 2000s, right? But going to clubs back then, there were two types of experiences, right? I had friends who had friends that could get us into like VIP places at clubs in Vegas and stuff. And you would go to these clubs and there would be lines around the block, right? But you would walk up and you would walk beside the line, and you'd walk up and there's the bouncer and he's like, "Oh yeah, 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 go on inside." Right? You go inside and you wouldn't even go where everybody else goes. You'd go to the side where everybody's just kind of sitting and chilling and having a good time, right? That's kind of the way it is looking for jobs, right? If you're out there submitting your resume, you're the one standing in line hoping that the bouncer's like, "Oh yeah, we've got room for two more. Come on in," right? Um, if you've got a network of friends, who know people that are like, "Hey, yeah, 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 come over here, let's talk to this person." Um, you're the person who's walking past that line, walking up to the bouncer, and the bouncer's like, "Oh yeah, 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 go on inside," right? Um, and so, yeah, exactly, Outdoors. Um, I know that I can bring a lot of value, and I could spend 12 hours a day working and grinding. I need to find people who are hungry. And one thing I do want to be careful about here is the grind culture and some of the language you're using there, like hungry and things like that. Um, it works really well for a while, and then you burn out. And once you burn out, it's a heavy burnout, right? Um, so grinding is okay, because I had to grind early in my career because I didn't have a degree, right? And so I did a lot of grinding and took a lot of really bad jobs where I had to grind. But the burnout is very real. Um, hey, yeah, I I'm gonna call you Yek, because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. You may have to tell me how to pronounce that. I have a couple of ideas, but I don't want to butcher your name. But thank you so much for following. Um, but be careful about getting into the grind culture and things like that. If you're going to grind, you need to have very healthy outlets for the grind, right? Um, make sure that you've got ways to get downtime where you're not constantly grinding, because you will burn yourself out, and recovering from that burnout is very difficult and can take a lot of time and can often set you back further than if you hadn't been grinding, right? Um, but I also recognize that grinding is a very real part of anything, and sometimes you just have to grind. Uh, and I agree with you, Julie. The job market is a disaster in the U.S. right now. Um, I do know from conversations that I've had that the job market looks like it will be turning around in 2025. Um, and things are looking up from what I've heard. Um, but yeah, the tech job market in the US, I don't want to get into politics, but the tech job market in the US is largely messed up because of politics. And it's very, very frustrating, those politics involved. And I really, that's as much as I want to say publicly. Um, and if anybody wants to talk privately, I'm happy to talk privately. listening and based on your political biases, you're probably wrong on both sides of the aisles about what I'm thinking. Um, but the U.S. job market is very messed up. Um, a good schedule, yep. Very, very healthy schedule, right? Grinding 12 hours a day, 7 days a week is just going to kill you. It's going to burn you out and you're going to hate what you do, right? So you need to find ways to reward yourself for working hard. And sometimes grinding is not the solution, but working smarter and learning how to reward yourself for working hard and working smart. So yeah. Um, yeah, thank you for the snipe today. It was a good one. Um, you're thinking 6 days, around 8 hours, but I figure it out as I go. And that's 6 days around 8 hours. I mean, that winds up being 48 hours. Uh, the crazy thing is in the US, that's kind of a typical work week, which is sad, right? And I believe that's a big reason why a lot of tech workers in the US burn out, is they're typically working around 50 hours a week, and they aren't getting the downtime, and they aren't, it's crazy. Um, yeah, you need at least one day free, at least one. Um, even 5 10s with 2 days off, and they don't have to be consecutive days, but um, even 5 10s might be easier than 6 8s, right? But it really depends on your situation, and it really depends on knowing yourself and things like that. Um, but that downtime, and it needs to be real downtime where you're completely unplugged, right? Where you're not worried about anything. Um, and then vacation time too, right? Burnout comes not only from working those extra hours, but as a dev, even when I log off, I spend multiple hours thinking exactly, right? Um, and that's the reality of being an engineer and a dev, right? Is the way our brains are wired, they don't stop, right? When the clock hits 5, right? And when I worked on the farm, right, as a child, when it was time to go home after I'd moved to the last wheel lines with my brother in the evening, right, and we checked everything out, made it sure everything was running, we went home. I wasn't thinking about moving wheel lines. I wasn't thinking about walking up and down beet rows, knocking down weeds. I wasn't thinking about um, whatever else I was doing, right? As soon as I got home, I was unplugged and I didn't care, right? The problem with devs is that we're often experiencing issues that get trapped in our subconscious, right? And how many times have you guys dreamed about a problem at work? How many times have you guys solved a problem at work in the shower? How many times have you guys, right? These are common experiences that you hear about from devs, and it's because the way our brain works, it gets trapped in our subconscious. And you're 100% correct, Julie, that um, our line of work and a lot of mental lines of work, just because the clock ended, right? And technically I'm not being paid doesn't mean I'm not working. So that is a very insightful. Uh, I'm on vacation from 20 to the 7th. Wow, every single consultant has those vacations. I mean, Christmas. That's a good holiday. I go to the bar and get coffee, and I'm like, oh, I need to try the solution to my problem. I haven't tried this one. Yes, exactly, Alvarez, right? Your subconscious is constantly working, and there is a tax to that, and it leads to real burnouts. And you'll hear about like high-end engineers who, they go on sabbatical, right? They're at the peak of their career, and suddenly they're like, I want to just go travel for a while, right? Or um, it's a very real thing, and burnout is very real. Ads. I'm sorry about the ads. I've tried to cut them down as much as possible. Um, let's take a look at some code while we're doing ads, right? So p npm exec nx run, and we were doing the components. Yeah, we were testing our components. because our components had some issues. So we'll get into like the unit testing stuff that I wanted to take a look at. I want to take a look at this, but I don't want to take a look at this today. We'll take a look at this here in a little bit. But I do want to see, like right now, right, the button host component has some issues. And actually, let's merge this stuff in. So we updated dependencies. Anyway, let's take a look at our button host component and see what's going on here. Now it doesn't look like I even have my code editor open. But yeah. So here is our button host component. And if we look at our test, it is this line 120 where the cell value has changed, right? So we've got this issue going on here. But our grid store doesn't have cell value changed. So let's take a look at our grid store. You know what, let's so one thing I like about VS Code is there's a way to get my open files. And I'm sure there's a way to do it in WebStorm. Because what I want to do is just close all of these without having to click on all of them. I want to keep these two files open, but we're okay. Okay, so let's take a look at our grid store. And in our grid store, come on, there we go. And I still need to figure out this signal error too. But I think it's inside of with grid. So yeah, this is where cell updated was moved into this. Update grid. What's wrong with grid? It's the one that's using the signal. I don't think that because we do have the notion of updating a grid. So update cell value. And these are all private methods. Signal store gives us the ability to do private methods. So with grid errors, with game one, solver and keyboard navigation. No, I think it's here. Oh, that's cool. We've got the Amazon guy out with the Santa hat on today. That's really cool. So with method cell updated, update cell value. Because this is the method that we're trying to call from our button host, our cell value changed. Wasn't there an ng on in it that we were using? Update game one. Backing of states. Update grid. Sorry about the dogs. Somebody just knocked on my door. What's in grid computed? This has our with concluded. It's got our selected. That's not what we want. What I want to figure out is here in with grid, where does update grid come from? So update grid comes from the with grid. With grid, it's just an updater. Because what we're trying to do in the button host is we're trying to load the values into our grid. And we're going through each cell and we're actually setting the value on the row index and column. This dot grid store dot, let's see what we get in here. Creating puzzle, columns, has error. You know what? This is actually pointing to an issue. The issue is this logic should not be here, right? That's really the issue. So set grid values is used in a couple of things, right? Like where we generate the problem grid, and we generate a grid with errors, and we generate a winning grid. So we're using this set grid, but this code is in the wrong place. And the reason that I can say that is that after the refactor, we can't really use these values, right? Because we've moved our features and stuff into protected areas, and they're no longer public. So we've cut down on our API, which now makes it difficult for this code to work. So instead, this stuff needs to exist in our store, probably in our grid feature. So let's move it here. So we've got our with methods. Let's add another with methods here. And this is going to take our state and we're going to do some patches on it. Actually, this needs to return an object. So let's do that. And then we're going to just do set grid value, right? Is that what we called it? And we'll paste this in. And then here, our values is a cell value array of array. So we'll do the same. Set grid values. And what we accept here is just values. And it's going to be a cell value array. And so now what we can do is we can just say, hey, we're going to, what happens if cell values is undefined? So here it would just do nothing. So we're going to do the same thing. Let's make our API match this. So because we just copy the code straight across, we're just going to make our API do this. So we'll copy this over. So there we go. So now we can go back to our button host, and we can just say, hey, this dot grid store dot set grid values and values. So for right now, we're just doing a straight copy across. We're going to refactor because we actually don't need this private method anymore. But we'll do that after we fix up the store here. So we've got this method that sets the grid values. We loop through each, and here we just need to call state, right? Say that our cell value changed. And we don't have that one anymore. I believe it's cell updated, row and number. No, update cell value, value row column. Yeah, that's the one we want. So now we've fixed this, and I believe we just got extras here, right? I must have added an extra semicolon there. But so now we've added this. One thing, if we go back and we take a look at our button host component, this set grid values, the way it was before, and if we go, probably the easiest way to compare this is to go here and look in our button host component. What did it change here? Oh, it removed, I must have had some extra space. That's interesting. But if we look, one of the things that we could have done to recognize that we had problems, and this is kind of a code smell, right? Or a heuristic that we can use, right? Cell value changed is, it's what do we want to say? It's an internal event, right? The external event that we should be reacting to would be called on cell value changed, but cell value changed, like in an event driven format, we would say, you know, in the class that's going to raise the on cell value changed, we would have an internal function called cell value changed. And when we called cell value changed, it would raise the external event on cell value changed, right? The fact that we're calling a class or a class method that should probably be internal, you know, it's typically in an event-driven system, and the way we've named this leads us to think of event-driven system. We're using an internal function. That should have been a clue, right? And one thing I will tell you is, I'm not going to be harsh on past me, right? Because the fact that I recognize this now shows that I've grown as a developer, right? Past me may or may not have recognized this. Who knows what was going on then, right? But currently, I recognize that, hey, this should have been internal. So this should have clued me into what I was doing here. Wasn't going to be extensible. And, you know, a small change, right? Moving this code into the store, it's a small change, but in the grander scheme of things, it takes a whole bunch of logic out of this component that it didn't need, right? So now this component is really wrapping the store, and that logic no longer has to be tested, and it can be moved into a store test. And that gives us a whole bunch of benefits, right? First of all, our component tests become easier. Second of all, it's easier to isolate a store or a service or something like that than it is to isolate components, right? Components always bring in, I mean, they're always going to have to bring in the DOM and the browser, right? And isolating your components from that um, can be difficult. Um, Jest does things like JS DOM, but the JS DOM in Jest doesn't behave the way that like a browser DOM does, so you can't test things that way. So then we do things like component tests, and component tests bring in the whole DOM and things like that, right? So we aren't really isolating. It's much more difficult to isolate. So this change winds up being better. The other thing that this change gives us is now we can get rid of this method, right? We don't really need it. And instead, we can come up here and we can just say, hey, instead of doing this, we can just say, hey, this.gridStore dot set grid values, right? And again, this is one of the things that I've learned recently is that, a good abstraction leads to new vocabularies, right? So our new vocabulary here is, the set grid values. So our abstraction here winds up being better in the long run, and it's actually like our tests are probably still going to fail, but they aren't going to fail for compilation issues, right? So the grid component, we probably need to fix up, but button host component, creating puzzle mode is not a function. So let's fix this one up too. So in our button host component, it is saying so our toggle button text, right? We're doing a computed based on this, but creating puzzle mode, do we have this dot grid store dot? Oh, there it is right there. Creating puzzle mode is a signal. So, my button host component on line 16, create component. We don't actually have good tests here. Oh, here's the problem right here. It's entirely with my store. And I can show you why we have this problem. So our grid store, in with puzzle mode, if we take a look, toggle, no, that's the toggle, our state, our grid state, when it looks at our grid state, it sees create puzzle mode as creating puzzle mode as a property and not as a function. So when it mocks that function, it doesn't create it as a function like it should. So we can do that. We can just say, hey, creating puzzle mode. And here we can just actually, probably the best way to do it is just, oh yeah, we could use a stub. I like that. So, yep. And we already had this stuff in here. Um, so, um, we can just add this right here. We can just say grid store stub. And this is one of the things I love about, is it not like, why doesn't it like grid store stub? So it's type that and grid store stub partial type that. What doesn't it like? Oh, it doesn't know what a signal is. Creating puzzle mode. It doesn't like my creating puzzle mode. Yeah, it does. It's right there. No, it literally exists right there. We can see it, right? Like it doesn't exist, but creating puzzle mode. Signal Boolean. Um, well, there's one thing I actually like to do here is that, and I like to make these factories. So let's clean that up first. And the reason I like to make these factories is it makes it difficult for me to accidentally mutate stuff. But I'm really curious about why it doesn't like creating puzzle mode. So partial type of grid store, and maybe it just needs to be grid store. What is grid store? Grid store returns that. But it is not a type, right? Which is why we needed to use type of. And I think we also need to do here type of. No. But once I do that, can I do so grid store is type and then grid game one that end state source, right? Partial type of grid store end state source. But grid store stub, oh, that's the problem. And now it doesn't like this. because it's a value. Because it's the return type from my signal store. If I do return type here, does that work? Yeah, there's no return type here. That should work because, but it becomes, well, it's seeing here, we can see the grid, signal, cell state. Can I do grid here? No. Why doesn't it? So creating puzzle mode should just be a signal here, right? And it needs a value. But this isn't working. One of the things we can do is we can go to NGRX here and we can go to our GitHub. And let's go take a look at the modules in our signals module. And inside of here, they've got all their tests in a folder. So here's how they test their signal stores, and I'm maybe so here they're just creating signal stores, and this is actually kind of what we're doing. This is kind of what we're doing at work, where we'll create our own signal stores and add our own with state and stuff to it to control what it shows. With methods, with hooks. Let's go take a look. I think there's a way to. So signal stores testing. This is the one. So that, but where do they talk about RX method mocking the signal store? This is um so movie store, movie signal, this use value movies store. So I think really it's this piece right here that's causing the problem. Um, and instead, we just need to provide an object here. The object, what I want to do um, is we want to be able to control creating puzzle mode. So typically what I'll do is I'll create a signal, creating puzzle mode equals signal. And here we'll just set it to false from right off the bat. And then inside of here, we can just do creating puzzle mode, right? But we have a problem now that our tests now depend on the order that they're run in, right? Because if I come down here and I say, hey, creating puzzle mode dot set true, right? It's still going to work, but now any test that runs after my create is going to get a puzzle mode of true. And I don't want that because I want my tests to be predictable. And if my tests get randomized, or if my tests, if I remove a test that was relying on a value set somewhere else, right, my tests are no longer predictable. And my tests rely on the order that they're run in. That's never a good thing. There are a couple ways we could do this, right? Probably the best way to do it is to just say, hey, I think what I may do is I just may do an after each. And inside of here, we're just going to reset our creating puzzle mode. Equals false, or dot set false, right? So that's one way we could do it. But the problem is, what if somebody comes in here and changes this to true, right? Now all my tests, that relied on this being false, right? That there's different things that could happen here. The other way we can do this is we can take advantage of our create component, and we can use partial application here, right? So create component. We can create a partial around this. Well, first of all, can I? No, it just takes. So one thing we could do is we could say create component equals, and here we could say create. We could say creating puzzle mode equals signal false, right? And then we can have a function that returns a function. That's one way to do it. The other way is we could call this immediately. And so now create component accepts a function. And if we don't care about the signal, we don't have to pass one in. But if I cared about the signal, I could just, const creating puzzle mode equals signal false, right? And then I could just pass this in here. And so now I've got two ways to interact with, with my component. If I don't care about creating puzzle mode, then I don't have to pass something in and I'm just going to get it. If I care about it, then I can create it and pass it in, and then I can, create, creating puzzle mode dot set, and then, true. And so I can run tests around that too, right? But the real thing we should think about here is, why do I even have this just test for a component? If we take a look at my component, it no longer really needs just tests. Now what it needs is probably some component tests that test that the various things happen. So if we go take a look here, we've already got tests, right? So my suggestion, and I'm curious about why this doesn't work. What does get testbed do? Must have been something from before, because I can just do testbed, right? Dot inject. I never finished this. That's the reason why this test isn't finished. We'll leave it commented out and we'll come back to it. But right, we've already got component tests here. This jest test is actually not useful. I guess technically we could say it's okay because it's, I don't know. We'll leave it for now, but my recommendation is that we don't have, if I'm going to recommend that, I should just delete it. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to delete. Okay. There we go. And that solves our issue, right? Because now we no longer need that test. So we don't even need some of the stuff we were doing in it. And that should solve some issues there. And so let's go fix that up. So one of the things we did, we needed the set grid values. So we can just say that, hey, we moved the set grid values to the feature. Actually, unstage these, unstage this. We removed generated tests for button host component. And in our description, we can even say, we already had component tests, and unit tests don't make sense for a component, right? We can say something like that. And that is definitely an opinion of mine. It's a little bit of a strong opinion that I hold, but I think your components should be written in such a way that you don't need to unit test them, right? And then the next thing we can do is we can just say, hey, we moved uh, set grid values to the grid feature with grid feature, right? So that was another change we made. And then this one looks to be formatting changes. So I'm just going to revert these changes. And we'll come back to this file when we do our component tests. So there we go. And that fixes up those test issues. So now we're on to the actual grid component tests. And the grid store is where I really want to get into stuff. And we'll pick that up tomorrow night. Let's see if we can get this grid component fixed, and then we can test the grid store. And at that point, I think we're in a place where we can run things. So let's take a look at our grid component. So I want to just close all tabs. And let's bring up our grid component. Grid component. Yeah, and that's actually the file we want, is this one. And so we've got a problem again, because as soon as I go type here, type of, can I use type from Angular? Like Angular has its own type helper. Does that work? No, because type expects, so we definitely, like, I could take this grid store stub, and I'm definitely not following like stuff that I've long since changed over to, like using factories for stubs and things like that. But this isn't returning the right type, and that's what's breaking my tests, right? And then my cell value changed and stuff. That should be in the store tests now. So let's experiment with some types, right? Const type grid store equals type grid store, right? And let's just make this grid store 2. And this is type of, right? And so grid store 2, undefined object boolean number string function symbol big int. Well, that explains the problem we've got here. And I can probably even get rid of this. No, it's going to give me a circular, right? So we've got, that's the problem with type. If we try const type grid store 3 equals grid store, it's going to tell me that grid store is it expects a comma. Why does it expect a comma? See, I created a bunch of helper methods before, based on some stuff that was in. See what other tests we've got here. Our helpers? What's in our helpers? Mm. So create local service. Creates a service token. That's not what we want either. Types. What's in our types? In our helpers here. No. Match state types. Signal state types. So allow passing state as a generic object. Equals signal state, foo state, blah, blah, blah. These are some cool tests as I'm looking through these because they're creating snippets, then they're using this expect snippet function they've written um, to say that, hey, this compiles. Um, and then they're saying that, hey, it should infer certain things. And they're able to say that, these certain properties should infer certain things. So an empty signal state. But what I want is, how do I inject like the type of my store? And that may actually come from, I remember there was so if I went into signal store, maybe it's in TS helpers where I saw it. So non-record, prettify is record, omit privates. Nope, those aren't the ones that I want. This autoplayed in my car. I'm happy to have you here, Michael. It's good to see you. Last week, I didn't expect. So we went out to my mother-in-law's to do family pictures. My wife is a photographer, and she woke me up in the morning. She's like, "Hey, we're going to my mom's house, and we've got to leave." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I got showered and we left. Um, so, yeah, I'm 2 weeks out, but So signal store config, signal store members. Because like all of this inference stuff I've done before, but what if I do type of grid store and here I grab state. Does that work? No. What are my options here? Because that's the weird thing, right? Is my grid store is an object, but it has this type. But as soon as I add the type of operator to it, it's being turned into this. And actually, the const doesn't make sense either, right? Type grid store 2, initial type signal store members, signal store feature results. But so here, if I do like grid store 2, like if I do type test equals grid store 2, and here I do, we've got length name apply. Okay, so what if I do return type, because it looks like a function, grid store 2. And now it's going to tell me that grid store 2 is not a function. But if I do grid store 2 and somebody's here, yeah, instance type. Is it instance type? Can I grab the instance type off of the grid store? Or is it? Yes, I am trying to do the type counter store equals instance type. So you're saying here, yeah, I am trying to do that. Yep. Oh, I should just be able to add it to the component store itself. And that, so if I go into my grid store, and you're just saying I should be able to do type, I should be able to export type grid store equals instance type. So I've got my grid store, export type. I need to look at the docs. What I should be doing. So if we go up here, that's not the one. State tracking. Which one is it? It's in the FAQ. Okay. Oh, it's instance type. Yeah, there we go. Instance type, and then the type of grid store. And that's the piece I was missing. I remembered there was something. Yeah, so now it doesn't like this because of the signal stuff, right? But now it should see it as a type. Great. Update selected. I don't think that exists anymore. I know it doesn't exist. So there we go. My imports, cell value change does not exist anymore. And so now my unit tests are broken. Thank you, Michael. I knew I was missing something. And it's been a while since I've done this. So this store value changed doesn't make sense anymore. And this test should actually not be here. Because this isn't how the store works anymore. So let's take a look at my grid component. And by the way, I think, how big is my font? Is it too small? No, it's normal. Okay. For row of grid store.grid. Ooh, we've got problems here. We definitely have some problems here. So our grid import cell component and grid cell. So where is my grid store? Grid store is here. So we've got our grid. We've got some problems in here. We're still trying to use cell value changed, which we don't want to do. But why is it not recognizing grid here? And this might be an issue. So like if I come down here, if I just do this dot grid store dot grid, yeah. So I think the issue we've got up there is a WebStorm issue and not because it's not recognizing the type and it's not recognizing grid. And here we've got grid store dot selected and next to focus. And these, I know these are all here. But this is a problem. So when my cell value changes, what doesn't it like here? I think that's just a display error. But my cell value changing here is a problem. That we can't use anymore. This dot grid store dot I don't think we have a way to set the value of a cell. And we need that. But again, we're using cell value changed here, which is an internal function. Let's just provide a wrapper for this, right? Set cell value, and we'll pass in new value, and we'll pass in cell state. And then we're going to move this into patching our state. And so actually we want value to use and not, no, let's just grab all of this. So we're going to move that into our grid. So we need a set cell value on our grid. So here, let's go to our grid store and go to our with grid. And down here, where we added our set grid values, in our grid component, we can just say set cell value. And here, this will take in some stuff, but let's get our code in here first. So boom, paste that in. And then in our grid component, we can grab this stuff right here. And we'll move this over. So there we go. And then we're missing, wait, where's value as cell value coming from? Is it coming from here? No, it's not. It's coming from cell state, so that's good. I was worried that it was in the wrong place, but we're good. But really, now we can just say, hey, store, and then we can just say, or no, this is state, right? It's state.update cell value, state.update cell value, right? And so that's going to fix that. And that's going to fix this test. Now our grid store does that. And let's take a look at our unit tests. So yeah, our grid component is expecting cell value changed to have been called, but that's no longer the case. Now it is set cell value should have been called on our, and it's not going to be this, but at least we can fix this, right? Cell value, set cell value to have been called with that. And if we take a look, it's just new value and then cell state. So if we go take a look at our tests, they're now failing. Cell value changed. Where is cell value changed? What is it saying here? Property cell value does not exist on type grid this. On line 51. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Line 51. Grid.components.tso. Well, no, that's not there anymore. What's going on? Selected, next to focus. Hmm. So a lot of this stuff can be made protected. Let's protected. Protected. And I like to make stuff protected that's only being used in the template. That way somebody can't call it outside of, whatever, like outside of my component. So all of these, I like to make them protected. My cell value blurred. Protected. But why is it saying so that ran, and now my grid component has some issues. Oh, yeah, that's gonna cause problems. And this is a good example of some tests. Once I made these protected, I can no longer call them, right? And because I can no longer call them, that's a good example that, hey, you know what? These tests are not in the right place. So we can take a lot of this stuff. Yeah, so navigated, track by function. Like a lot of this stuff needs to be moved into component tests, and so we'll take a look at doing that. So one thing we can do is we can just say, hey, to do move to component tests, right? And now we're back to a point where my grid is really small, right? It's really just this should create test. And there's not a lot of value in the should create. I'm not going to remove this yet. I'm not sure why those are highlighted over here. What is that highlight for? Oh, that's cool. ESLint is telling me, hey, I've got commented out tests. I like that. That's a really good addition to ESLint. So right off the bat, we've got some good fixes in place. One of the things that we know is that these tests should never have been unit tests, right? And that's because we're trying to test logic. You have any strong opinion on Laravel? That is a terrible addition to ESLint. Yeah, for developers it is. For me, it's like, thinking about why I actually like this. I really like this. Um, how did I get that to pop up before? Why doesn't it pop up here? It must be once they're outside of, yeah, it is. It's once they're outside of the functions, then I can see them. Um, and actually, this one's not popping up. That one's not popping up. I don't know what's going on. But I do like that it, it's a rule that we could turn on if we needed to, if we were at the latest version of ESLint. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go rest my voice. Um, if I push it too much more today, I'm definitely not. Um, I'll lose it, and it'll be tough to stream tomorrow. I won't say I definitely wouldn't, but it would be tough to stream tomorrow. Um, I want to give my voice a rest so that we can come back and stream. But yeah, um, hey, thanks a lot, Michael. And um, I want to pop in. Are you streaming this week or next week, Michael? No, not Tuesday. Tuesday's Christmas Eve. I would get into so much trouble if I tried to stream Christmas Eve. Like my family would probably disown me. Um, so yeah, I'm moving my streams for the next 2 weeks from Tuesday back to Monday. Um, and that was something I mentioned at the beginning. But yeah, um, I definitely don't want to get into the level of trouble that it would cause if I tried to stream Christmas Eve. And I also want to be respectful of, just people's time in general, right? I guess you guys could rewatch it at a different time, but um, yeah. To answer your question, Abradores, I don't have a strong opinion on Laravel. I think it's a good version of PHP from what I know of it, but I don't know a lot of it. I haven't used it. I know a lot of people really like it. Um, so my opinion is I don't know, but I do know people who really like it. So if you're asking, should you learn it? If you have time, any language you learn is going to help. It doesn't matter what the language is. Um, every every new language I've learned has given me different insight in the way that I write codes, and I write code in other languages, right? Um, so if you have the time to learn a language and you want to learn Laravel and you feel like it'll help, go for it. So that's probably a safe bet right now. Very safe bet. Um, those all look to be big, big contenders out there. React is huge, Laravel is huge, and Docker. Um, yeah, Java is probably going to help you more in enterprise, like the enterprise world. And especially if you want to get into like fintech, right? If you're interested in fintech, Java is probably the way to go. Um, but yeah, Nest.js, so I have some sort of back end. But then I wouldn't have to do Java. Exactly. Java. Uh, Java, I struggle with. A lot of people really like it. The last time I tried to learn Java, I think was in Java 8. And at that point in time, Java 8 felt like I knew .NET really well at the time, and Java 8 felt like .NET 4 versions back, right? Like Java felt like it was playing catch up. Um, and I don't know what modern Java is like, so I can't speak to that, but I feel you there. I have a stream on using Nest.js. And if you want to go take a look, Michael, at my Angular Dynos repo, I've got a whole bunch of stuff using Nest.js and GraphQL and Apollo and a bunch of stuff like that. So if you want to go back and look at like my Angular Dynos streams, I go through Nest.js quite a bit. I actually found it. So most of my backend experience is in .NET. I found Nest.js to be very comfortable and familiar with my .NET background. Um, and it makes a lot of sense. I found it to be a strong framework. I don't see a lot of I don't see a lot of people using Nest.js, but that may just be that I don't work in areas where it's highly used, right? But I enjoyed it, found it a lot of fun, um, and there are a lot of great tools that hook right into it. So, if you've got 2 weeks to learn something, oh, and you've got a .NET background, I think you'll find Nest.js. If you've ever written .NET APIs, you'll find Nest.js to be right at home. Um, there were some things about Nest.js that the way now that Angular's gone to standalone, um, took me a little bit of time to remember like doing modules and stuff like that. So there was some stuff that did I, clunky's not necessarily the word, but it just felt a little bit off. But yeah, um, it's general backend stuff, I bet. Yeah, well, and that's the thing is learning the concepts is important. Because once you know the concepts for a RESTful API or a GraphQL API or something like that, they can be applied everywhere. And I'm really cracking. My voice is really cracking. But those those concepts are good to learn. And you already understand JavaScript. But where you've got a .NET background, you could also look at like .NET minimal APIs or .NET Core or something like that, and it might be friendly and at home for you too. But they're going to be very similar in the way they approach things. And I think a lot of the modern Java frameworks that do APIs approach things from a very similar perspective. Um, I think the nice thing about backend is they settle into patterns that stay stable for a long time, right? The front end is crazy and we're constantly changing, but backend, whatever you choose to learn is probably going to serve you wherever you go. So, as for using like Node or JavaScript on the back end, there's some really big companies doing it, right? I mean, take a look at like Netflix and a couple other ones who used Node backends for a long time. I think they're switching over to Rust, um, but it's been a while since I've read the Netflix tech blog. Um, but I'm basing that entirely off of guesses based on stuff I've seen from like the Primeagen. But I don't know if Netflix is still using Node and stuff on the back end. Anyway, you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow at 5:30 Mountain Time. Um, and other than that, you guys have a great end of the year. Hopefully, things are going well for you. Hopefully, people are able to rest until the new year. And enjoy your time. So, didn't Ben Lesh work at Netflix and add a bunch of RxJS? I don't know. I don't I don't know where Ben Lesh worked, but yeah, you guys have a good one. And Michael, I'm definitely popping into any of your streams if you're streaming this week. So, send me a message and let me know when you're going to be streaming because I've got free time this week. So, but yeah, you guys have a great, rest of the day. See you next time.